House of the Dragon, House of the Dragon, House of the Dragon, House of the Dragon, House of the Dragon. These videos are meant to entertain you, and I must grab viewers, I must grab viewers, I must grab viewers, I must grab viewers. Hey, we're gonna be talking about House of the Dragon. And you know what? I got some specials for you. Zaldrizas, Buzdari, Ixos. A lot of people tend to think, maybe not a lot of people, but there are some people, some uninformed people, who think that Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon is fantasy light. Well, let me tell you, George R. R. Martin likes his fantasy like he likes his salt in food. Just enough, and it knocks it out of this freaking world. Too much, and it's a salty piece of shit dish. In this video, I want to discuss how this series, the new one, the Game of Thrones prequel, House of the Dragon, will include fantasy elements like magic and whatnot. Please do me a massive favor and slap a like on this video. So like goal is going to be 42 long nights. Fantasy light. What is that? Well, it's the later seasons of Game of Thrones minus the dragons and the zombies and the reincarnation and the belief in prophecy and how everyone kind of is from a magical bloodline, at least the main characters. To the unaware, those things slip in under the radar, and that is exactly what George R. R. Martin does. He knows that the way to make the best fantasy story of all time, which is what A Song of Ice and Fire is you make it as realistic as possible, but then you add in these inexplainable magical elements. For instance, in House of the Dragon, right? The story, the Dance of the Dragons, it's about the downfall of the Targaryens, the civil war that literally brought about the death of the dragons, right? So dragons themselves are magical creatures. I've been saying for 2 years now, in a world where there are this many dragons, there has to be that much more magic. Because part of the reason why dragons die is because the world loses a large chunk of its magic. Or at least that part of the world. And it has a lot to do with the Maesters. It also has to do with like actual Targaryens themselves misinterpreting dreams and killing off the last of the dragons. Allowing Aegon III has a fear of dragons because he watches his mother Rhaenyra devoured by Sunfire on the commands of Aegon II, right? So that Targaryen who rules, he's the son of Daemon and the son of Rhaenyra, at the end of the dance, he has a fear of dragons from there on. He's Dragon's Bane. He literally does everything he can to facilitate dragons not being around, right? So from that point forward, dragons are less and less, and then they get smaller and smaller, and then eventually they're non-existent until Daenerys walks into that funeral pile of Khal Drogo and brings fire and blood back into the world, right? So this show kind of, is like got to make its own way because it doesn't have, several book series that have really laid out an exact map and we're just watching a translation of it on screen. That's not the case. There's one book that details the major events of this story, so the writers kind of have to fill in the blanks. And for the most part, everyone knows Ryan Condal, Miguel Sapochnik worked on Game of Thrones, but everyone knows Ryan Condal is like, if one of you commenting on this video or one of the people that makes YouTube videos about Game of Thrones here on YouTube, it'd be like if one of us were, helming a TV show, right? Because he knows Martin's work inside and out. Martin was friends with him before he chose to have him put into this position of showrunner. So it just makes sense that if they know the source material, it's very easy to include even more magic than the main series has. For instance, the High Towers, which is like their house was kind of left out of the main series, but the High Towers have been around since before the First Men. Oldtown literally has its name because it's the oldest town in all of Westeros. It's hard to explain, but the High Towers themselves were kings way before the First Men even came over. And if you're unaware, before the First Men came over, Westeros was largely just the elder races. There is fused stone everywhere in the high tower and in the citadel, and there's some maesters that think that there were probably some dragon lords that came over because of that, right? So the only other place where there's fused stone with no seams is the Valyrian road. The dragon lords literally built this seamless road, and when Tyrion is on it in the Dance with Dragons, he marvels at it. It's amazing. Like, the road is perfect, whereas Westeros, it's mostly muddy tracks and bullshit. Aside from the King's Road, it's still nothing compared to the Valyrian road. So the fact that that is such a crazy marvel, a lot of the Maesters think that the Valyrians may have established Oldtown as some sort of a trading outpost to trade with the elder races, so the giants and the free folk. For instance, the Valyrians, yes, they rode dragons, but they're also massive asshole slavers, so they probably tried to come over and enslave the elder races, right? So this is all before the first men even came over. So the history of Oldtown and the High Towers is intertwined. The fact that the High Towers have been established for such a long period of time, I think that's going to be further explored on this show. I think there will be some links in between the High Towers, Oldtown at the Citadel, and then the Faith of the Seven, because just 100 years before the starts of the events of this show, Maegor the Cruel was battling the Faith of the Seven, so the Faith Militant, it should be something that is referenced upon this show. But the fact that there were Valyrian lords over here before the First Men, right, is grounds enough to let you know that dragons existed in Westeros before the Targaryens ever came over to conquer it. Oh, and another thing to know is that we'll actually probably get some more confirmations on this show about some of the mysteries in A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, that's one of the benefits that we get, is that we kind of, like, a book can leave things up to a mystery and leave it up to the reader to interpret themselves and connect the clues. But a TV show is like, you kind of need some finality. So Game of Thrones pulled the mystery of Jon Snow's lineage and confirmed, hey, Jon Snow's parents are Rhaegar and Lyanna. And most likely, that's what Dan and Dave got right in order for them to get the power of making the show itself, like when they had that initial meeting with George R. R. Martin. So with this show, since it's before Baelor the Blessed, and before he burns all of these books, I wouldn't be surprised if we got several of the Maesters reading texts that are lost. Like Marwyn the Mage writes a book called The Book of Lost Books. So there's several Valyrian texts that just sort of are, like, could explain further mysteries. Like, okay, so Marwyn the Mage is this character that Sam meets at the Citadel, and the last we hear from him in A Feast for Crows is that he's going off to meet Daenerys, right? So Aemon is one of the oldest man in Westeros, the last, like, Targaryen. He should have been an Archmaester, but he was denied those rights because of his blood, because he was blood of the dragon. He couldn't be trusted. So they put him up on the wall to just sort of wither away. Marwyn tells Sam this, right? So the Maesters are against magic. They kind of want an equal playing field. Marwyn informs Sam of this. But, it's just so sidetracked in this video, but Marwyn actually has this thing called a glass candle, which is like this, like, 4-foot wide, crazy thing that is made out of obsidian, right? And Sam realizes that the flame, when it lights up certain colors appear, like, whites appear extremely bright, dark, like black colors, like his cloak, appear to be voids in darkness, like a void in light itself. It's hard to explain, but basically the whole purpose of the glass candle is that Valyrian sorcerers used to enter dreams. They would communicate over thousands of miles. They could see things that were happening in real time. A glass candle is one of the most powerful things to ever have existed in all of Westeros. It's basically a giant cell phone, right? So, and it's interesting because Sam says, how is it burning? But it doesn't, like, there's no wax dripping. Like, how is it fueled? And Marwyn says, well, how is dragon fire fueled? All of the Valyrians all of their sorcery dealt in blood and fire. So it's kind of like one of those higher mysteries. Anyway, I really hope we get to see some sort of glass candle used on this show. Alice Rivers, Aemon One-Eye's bitch, is a crazy woods witch. Supposedly Nettles is a woods witch. There's several characters that are called certain things, like Misery, Daemon's concubine. She is said to have dabbled in the dark arts. A lot of these characters are probably going to have more magical elements about them, right? Because this is at a time period where, like I said, there's an increased presence of dragons, so there has to be an increased presence of magic. And another thing to be explored is, like, zombies are real. It's very possible that a certain character is near death and is brought back. And, it's kind of like, oh, well, we already have that pre-established in Game of Thrones. And maybe it's not necessarily mentioned in the Dance of the Dragons history books, like in Fire and Blood. But it's just something that, kind of needs to stay happening during this time frame because it's canon with the regular show. Like, for instance, maybe one of the Targaryens dies on their dragon, but then they're brought back and they sort of just serve as a plot device for maybe one season or something. So it doesn't necessarily affect the outcome of the story, but it definitely includes more magical elements. With all that aside, hopefully the main point of this video was to entertain you, but it got you, more excited about this show. I'm going to thank you all so much for watching. My name is Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Long Night Reviews. Boom.